Thanks, gentlemen. Yesterday, PD DNI Dixon and Vice Admiral Sharp, and this morning, Director Scalise all talked about the history of GEOINT and something that we've all witnessed over the past few decades. And how impressed are we to see the capabilities that are out on the floor here today, many things that we could not have imagined 20 years ago. Well, now we're looking to the strategic future of GEOINT, the future of GEOINT. Each of these gentlemen's organizations represent a huge piece of where GEOINT is going to be going in the future, and each of their organizations has published strategy documents that talk to where intelligence and GEOINT is going in the future. We're going to talk a little bit about that, and we're going to get some audience questions to them, but before we jump into that, I'd like each of the panel members to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about their role and their organization. And I'll go down to the far end and start with you, Ed. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Rich. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ed Mornston. I'm the Director of Intelligence and Security at Army Futures Command in Austin, Texas. It's the Army's newest command. We've existed for just over 3 years now. And AFC was created to really be the centerpiece and to synchronize and integrate all of the Army's modernization efforts, of which there are many. I think we're at an inflection point for our ground force modernization, and I transitioned from NGA in March of 2000. So during the pandemic, executed a PCS move during the pandemic, and I've been there for about 1.5 years now.
Thanks, Gary.
Yeah, I'm Gary Duno. I'm the Associate Director for Enterprise at NGA. Before I talk about the job, I just want to say thanks to USGIF for pulling this off, especially for pulling it off in St. Louis, one of my favorite cities on the planet and really a rising star in this country. So my job as Associate Director for Enterprise is to pull the community together so that we can get after our hardest problems in a more efficient and effective way. Really responsible for the Director's priority of partnerships, our international partners, our U.S. partners, as well as industry and academia.
Hello, everyone. I'm Pino Nobile. I'm the head of the Geospatial section and NATO headquarters in Brussels, Belgium. And it's a pleasure to be here today. And I thank you, SGIF, for inviting me. And actually, I was wondering while I was flying over here in the US, why I'm sitting here today in this panel, and I gave the answer myself, to myself. It's NGA is well aware of the work they've done, in particular for the last 10 years in NATO headquarters in designing and building one of NATO's first GEOINT Common Intelligence Picture application, even before NATO actually had a GEOINT policy, which we recently got it like a couple of years ago. But my work in this field started like 9-10 years ago, designing this application. And I'm very happy and pleased to be here today. Thank you.
Thanks. Joe?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Cyrillic. I'm the Deputy Director of the Strategic Futures Group, the National Intelligence Council, part of ODNI. Before I talk a little bit more about the job, I'd also like to thank USGIF for a very personal reason. 22 years ago next month, I started with the intelligence community, and instead of reporting to headquarters at Langley like I was expecting, I was told to show up to a former ordnance factory in the Washington Navy Yard called Building 213, where I became an imagery analyst to start my career. But now I'm with the NIC. We are most known for producing the nation's national intelligence estimates. But my unit is responsible for long-range forecasting, and our primary product is every 4 years we publish what's called global trends. So the last one published beginning of this year, Global Trends 2040, A More Contested World. We do this for every new and incoming administration, as well as returning administrations, to provide a strategic baseline about what the long-term future is going to look like for them to base long-term planning on. And it's somewhat unique in that it's completely unclassified. which is unique for the NIC, and it's especially unique for the work we do. But that allows us to go out and get the opinions, get the assessments of academia, of industry, of our partners and allies, and even some countries that might not fall into that category of partners and allies. But it allows us to really fuse a lot of different perspectives and provide the best estimate we can provide about what the future is going to hold and what trends are going to shape that future. Thanks.
No, thank you, Joe. Thank you, gentlemen. I would like to encourage the audience to go ahead and write questions down and get them collected. This is gonna be a question-driven panel, and I've got a few here to start us off. I'm gonna go right back to you, Joe, if you don't mind. How will the intelligence environment in the future differ from the one confronted today? What changes can we expect?
So two things I'd like to highlight. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of changes being driven by technology, being driven by the environment. But two things that I think might be of interest to this group. The first is complexity. And I know everyone says, yeah, the world's going to be more complex in the future. But when I'm referring to complexity, I'm referring to the need to do less analysis and more synthesis. The intelligence community is going to be pressed to answer very large, very complex questions where providing trade space and identifying trade-offs is going to be of the utmost importance. So we saw that in the war against terror, but if you just think about going forward with our relationship with China, part of our intelligence community is going to be very interested in how do we compete with China strategically as a near-peer adversary. On the other hand, to deal with transnational issues like climate change, like global public health, we're going to need Chinese cooperation, and we're going to have to be cooperating with them. So how do you do both at the same time? And how does the intelligence community produce assessments and analysis to give that trade space to our customers, to allow them to think in a more structured way about how to do those trade-offs? The second thing is, in the West, in the United States, we talk about the commercialization of intelligence. And we can see that. We have a whole room full of private corporations that are offering services and products that were once only the domain of the intelligence community and of the United States government and other governments. And while I have no doubt that every company here is patriotic and loyal to the Republic, there are going to be companies in the future that don't have those loyalties. So when I think about the commercialization of intelligence in the long term, what I'm really talking about is a privatization of intelligence and the ability to offer those capabilities to the highest bidder, or even to lease them to someone who could barely afford them. So a country looking to start an aggressive war does not have to build an NRO or an NGA or a CIA or an NSA. They can lease those capabilities, or will be able to lease those capabilities. We see that now in things like cyber. In the future, you're going to see that with imagery. You're going to see that with SIGINT. You're going to see that with human.
Thanks very much, Joe. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we know that a lot of the capabilities here are not only available to us today. Let me transition over to Ed. Ed, you talked a lot about the Army Futures Command. Could you specifically talk about what your primary role is as the Senior Intelligence Officer at the Army Futures Command? And I may have a follow-up after that.
All right, yeah, sure. So my role as the G2 at AFC is much like the role of an intelligence officer in any command. It's to make sure that the commander and the decision makers have the information they need to make the decisions they need to. In this case, the decisions are about modernizing the force. So that's my primary role, informing the decisions about Army modernization. The second role is about protecting those modernization initiatives and programs that we undertake. We're doing a lot of great work in that regard, and it would be really good if those capabilities made it to the field in an uncompromised way. So that's my second role, it's protecting. And then the third role is really being a voice in the modernization of the force writ large and of the intelligence capabilities specifically.
No, thanks, Ed. And to that end, how is the Army approaching the use of GEOINT in that modernization effort that you're overseeing?
It pervades every modernization initiative and signature effort that we've got. The Army has 35, we call it 31 plus 4 modernization efforts. They're really the highest priorities, and they all rely to a large extent on advanced geospatial intelligence. Two of the cross-functional teams in particular are built entirely around GEOINT. The first of those is the Synthetic Training Environment, CFT, and that's really all about foundation GEOINT. One world terrain, high-resolution 3D terrain information is key not only to the synthetic training environment, but all of the CFTs. And the second CFT is the Assured Positioning, Navigation, and Timing CFT. We call it APNT. It's all about reducing sensor-to-shooter timelines. It's all about how do we task and downlink imagery to Army tactical units on the battlefield. Those are 2 of the 8 CFTs, but every single one of them relies on really capable GEOINT. Long-range precision fires, future vertical lift, next-generation combat vehicle, the network, they all rely on GEOINT. And to tell you the truth, I was very pleasantly surprised when I arrived in Austin to find out how informed the senior leaders were about the GEOINT enterprise. They all understand how it works, largely, what they need to do, and how we need to push the system going forward.
Oh, great. Thank you, Ed. And it's great to see that a lot of the capabilities you're talking about are represented here during GEOINT. And I also noticed that you focused on that Army domain, the terrain in particular. This morning, Dr. Scalise talked about a different domain, the space domain. I'd like to swing over to Pino and ask you, with the 5th operational domain of space now being included, how is GEOINT going to be a critical instrument in policy and decision-making for your organization in particular? How does the discipline of GEOINT need to evolve now that we're including that 5th domain?
Thank you for the question. Indeed, NATO declared space as the 5th operational domain back in December 2019. Head of States declared this operational domain. And obviously, we started to work on how we integrate this new operational domain into current GEOINT tools, and how do we make sure that analysts can get access to information rapidly to provide a report to the decision makers. The approach, first of all, I would like to say that all of us here because of, we all have an agenda, like you presented. So NATO has, and I encourage everyone to just Google and look for the NATO 2030 agenda, so which also captures on these requirements with 9 proposals that basically NATO is moving forward and agreed with the head of states. So the approach within space domain wouldn't change much, because we are always dealing and treating information, no matter, regardless of the domain. That's my approach. So like I've done for the current application on the GEOINT Common Intelligence Picture, I do intend with the upcoming new project, which is the Strategic Space Situational Awareness System, which is about to start next month in NATO, and also this information is also available on the NATO website. I do intend to treat and process the information the same way I process information coming from all the other domains. They all have something in common. So we all want access to information. Joe, you mentioned a moment ago the complexity. Indeed, there is a lot of complexity involved. There is a large amount of data available. Large amount of data bring amplified noise. So we also have to make sure that the amount of information not only is processed rapidly, but also that the information provided is accurate and not does not mislead a decision maker. Talking about information, we should also address the speed of information. Let's not forget, in 490 before Christ, Philippides ran from Marathon to Athens, or in over a day, to pass an information about the surprise victory of a much smaller army, the Greek army, and that, if you just think about, he had to run, and today we know as the marathon, he had to run to bring that information. Today, the information from one side or the other side of the world travels with Twitter, and it's instant, and we get to know everything. So within the space domain, my intention is really to treat it in the same way as any other domain and merge the all information coming from a proper space situational awareness embedded into this system. So I hope I addressed
Yes.
your question. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Pino. And the speed of information is sort of a theme that's been running through a lot of the keynote speakers here today, and of course everything that you gentlemen have been talking about. And it's something that you see in NGA's 2035 CONOPS. Gary, what's NGA and the intelligence community and this community at large going to do differently to make that 2035 CONOPS a reality?
Yeah, thanks, Rich. So first, let me give credit where credit is due. So the lead for the development of the 2035 CONOPS is sitting over here, Dawn Campbell. She's the one who pulled the community together to write that document. And it is truly a community-written document representing the thoughts of the community, the needs of the community, what the community wants to do going forward. So what do we need to do differently? You've seen a lot in the exhibit here the last couple of days and in the speeches and even in this panel about things that should give you at least two impressions. The first one is it's not about the inputs, it's about the output and how we can get to those outputs faster and act on those faster. The other impression should be it's no longer about who has the data, it's about how we use the data, because data is proliferating at such a rate that everybody pretty much has the same information. It gets to further in that OODA loop of observe, orient, decide, and act, where we used to have a distinct advantage in observe and orient. Now we've lost the advantage in that in many ways, and now we have to have the advantage in decide and act. So how do we do that? It's got to be a team sport. The GEOINT support to decision makers and warfighters cannot be a pickup game where when something happens, we just show up on the field and hope everybody brought the right equipment and the right uniform and understands all the plays. We have to work this from today being interoperable, which is one of the three end states within the 2035 CONOPS, and start building to standards and building the architectures and the connectivity, not just within NGA or within the US government, but with our international partners who are key to any activity that we're gonna conduct around the world. And build it in a way that we can start practicing today to get after those problems before it's too late, and then we try to figure it out on the ground. Just a quick example, right? In the CT fight, in the early days of the CT fight, units would drop in with their data. They would build their data, around the operations they were conducting within their deployment time frame, and then they would pull their racks and leave, and the next unit would drop in with their data, and they'd have to build it all over again, right? So that worked to a certain degree, but then General McChrystal and others forced those folks to say, we need the data to stay, we need to build on that data, synthesize the data, as Joe said, and get after the CT targets in a much faster and better way. That was at a certain scale, though. Now we're talking about a global scale to get at the complexity that my other panelists have talked about in decision time space, that we don't have a lot of time to think about those things. So we need to be able to have that interoperable environment in order to impact things that we call sensor to effect. You've probably heard sensor to shooter. Putting lead on a target needs to happen quickly with a lot of automation and not a lot of people in the loop. Same sort of thing for dropping a demarche on a government's desk. So sensor to effect is not just lead on target. It's the effect that the government wants to have using GEOINT to support that effect. And then lastly, and Pino talked about this a little bit, is the superiority in space and how we work the space mission together as an enterprise. But it really has to be a team sport. We need to come together, and we plan to do this around the CONOPS. The CONOPS lays out some pretty clear, aggressive end states, and we need to work together as a community, not just with the government, but industry and our international partners, to put together a campaign plan that drives us forward to those end states before 2035.
No, thanks very much, Gary. The first question we have from the audience asks something along the lines of what you just described, except it's asking how do we break down the barriers between GEOINT, SIGINT, OSINT? What should the enterprise be doing right now, specifically, to achieve the overcoming those barriers? And I think I'll leave that question open for other members of the panel after Gary provides an answer.
Yeah, sure. So, I think in today's budget environment, we're going to be driven towards those sort of decisions and actions based on the efficiencies that we need to create with the resources that we have. But I do think there is opportunity for us to take a look at stovepiped activities that really should be sort of enterprise activities, such as visualization of open source data that's geospatially referenced, right? Everybody has their own visualization capabilities. Maybe we shouldn't have so many. Maybe there should be one, right? And that's what everybody builds on and adds their specific discipline intelligence on top of. I do think, I'll speak to the U.S. government aspect a little bit, right? We live in this sort of 1970s built budget development cycle where we can't get at things fast enough, and there's a lot of parochialism built into the way we allocate resources around the government. I think we need to start thinking about that differently and think about resources from an enterprise perspective as well, and how we spend our money a little more wisely.
Oh, thank you. Ed, did you have a follow-up to that? I saw you, very, very good. Joe, when we talk about the technology that's been advancing here, what we see, where you stated we need to go, what do you think the technologies are that are really going to revolutionize GEOINT?
This one I'm pretty confident that I don't know. Technology is an interesting topic when you're looking at doing forecasting out into the far future. On the one hand, it's the one thing where humans and organizations have the most agency. We can make choices about how much we invest in. We can make choices about whether to emphasize research and development for AI versus research and development on quantum computing, and hopefully that pays off. But when you actually look at where tech breakthroughs come from, there's a degree of serendipity. So it's actually the least easy to predict or forecast in any sense. We could invest millions of dollars, billions of dollars trying to get a tech breakthrough, and some guy in their garage is gonna invent it before the government does, and vice versa. We could be ignoring a topic that you just stumble upon accidentally. The one thing I will say is where the true breakthroughs happen is not the individual technology, and it's not often the individual technology as it was designed or for whatever problem it was designed to solve. It is the interplay between a number of technologies and how they work together in ways that we never predicted, or the application of an existing or new technology that was meant for one problem that is used for something completely different. And when you get to that level of analysis, it becomes extremely hard to predict anything with any certainty. I'm just going to tell one little story. So I'm willing to bet everyone's got one of these in their pocket. All right, this is an Apple device. It really doesn't matter what company did it. Cellular technology is a product of the U.S. Army Signal Corps, trying to revolutionize battlefield communications. Digital photography is from NRO, so we didn't have to go after wet capsules falling from space. GPS, precision navigation and timing, was done for navigation and timing of precision weapons. And lastly, the internet was invented by DARPA. it's not those individual, we could see where those individual technologies were going, but no one could foresee putting them together in such a way that would speed the revolution of personal communication and personal connectivity so much.
No, thanks very much. Ed?
I do have a follow-on to tag on to Joe there. First thing I'd say is that Joe's office and Army Futures Command have a really good relationship. There's a few.
That sounds like you're going to disagree with me.
I am. Stick with me for a second. There's a small cadre of organizations that are charged with forecasting the future environment, like Joe talked about with global trends. We knew the NIC had done that, reached out to them because we are charged with writing a document for the Army called the Future Operational Environment. And we definitely wanted to be nested with what Joe's team had done with global trends. So we not only had a relationship with him, I went up and saw Joe in his office just to make sure that we were straight. Same with the Joint Staffs, Joe, the Joint Operational Environment. But to pick up on Joe's point about technology, the Army's about to start Project Convergence. It starts next Tuesday after the long weekend. The Army's taking 110 technologies to the field for 6 weeks to figure out, do they do what we think they can do? Will they interoperate? What technology works really well with another technology, to Joe's point? We're taking 110. I think there's 110 factorial options that may come out of that. This year we're taking Army operational units to Yuma and to White Sands to work this out in the desert from October through virtually the end of November. And the Joint Force is there. We've got 7 use cases that we're tactical scenarios that we're working with those 110 technologies. And it's the Army's campaign of learning to figure out how this really works. In a nutshell, it's a major interoperability exercise. Unfortunately, some of the Army's signature modernization efforts, as spectacular as they are, don't work with the other signature modernization efforts. We figured that out. For the last year, we've been doing a series of communications exercises, COMEX. The last one ended today at Yuma. But even to make it more continuous than that, we built a Joint Systems Integrations Lab at Aberdeen Proving Grounds. And we have been testing each of these technologies over the course of the last year, working out the interoperability disconnects so that when we get to the field, we can really work with the weapon systems and the communication systems and the navigation systems to see how they work and how they work together. The operational units, the 82nd Airborne Division and one of their brigade combat teams will be part of this. Interestingly, it's the same brigade that has just returned from Kabul. They were the brigade that was at HKIA. So General Donahue and one of his teams will be part of Project Convergence. And the other Army unit is the Multi-Domain Task Force, the MDTF, out of Joint Base Lewis McChord. So a legacy Army unit and a futuristic Army unit are going to be working with these 110 technologies. And it's a great tie-in to the JAD-C2 panel that was on the main stage today. Project Convergence is the Army's component of experimentation to enable JAD-C2. It's on the same level with the Advanced Battle Management System, ABMS from the Air Force, and Project Overmatch from the Navy. And of those 110 technologies that we'll be testing in the desert, I think 35 of those are from the Marines, the Air Force, and the Navy. So it's truly a joint effort. And next year, when we execute for fiscal year 22, we'll bring in the allies as well.
Wow, that's great, Ed. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something on what Joe said and also the other panelists here mentioned. So within the NATO 2030 agenda, so the fourth proposal actually captures on most of what has been said on investments, but also on preserving our technological age. As you mentioned, interoperability is key for NATO, for us. But I would like to add on how we a good approach would be, I would say, modularity is one approach that I'm looking at the moment. So for instance, with this new project coming up, the deliverables are designed as 6 applications within the space domain, but having in mind always security and modularity. So when the project will have to somehow scale up, and modularity has been placed in from the beginning by design, and make sure that applications that can intercommunicate and not being stovepipes like Gary you mentioned a moment ago. So the approach is always one identity with security in mind, one identity, one application, not so many applications, many sources. So that has always been my approach when designing the GEOINT CIP. So the application is one and only. The identity of the analyst or the staff officer is one across the platforms, having security in mind, of course, and then access to all possible sources, regardless of their location, whether they are coming from the open source world or from the Intel world, so Intel community, bringing all this together. I would like to also to add that you mentioned space as a 5th operational domain. Obviously, our 4th operational domain is cyber.
Yes.
And a lot of threats, we look at a lot of threats coming from that domain, of course, and it's very important. I would like to mention one statement that previous Deputy Secretary General of NATO, not the current one, the previous, so the American Madam Rose Gott Mueller, in a Shangri-La talks in Singapore in June 2018, she mentioned, I remember she stated clearly that over time, the threat can appear to us with new clothes in a different way, but it doesn't change much. So there will always be those Trojan horses there, and the history repeats. And in fact, we should not forget a statement that is well known by this philosopher. I'm pretty sure a lot of you know, George Santayana, who says, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So this is a methodology that I really apply. So, and actually we apply this right now with the AI. We provide the AI system or machine learning with the training models because they are learning from the past. They are learning from a lot of data and hoping that we can capture those, threats the right way. So I just want to add on that. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Rich, if I could, just 30 seconds. I love what Pino says about the modularity and the flexibility, right? When we have to conduct an operation, whether it's a military operation or a diplomatic operation or whatever, we act like we know ahead of time who we're going to do that with and what kind of data we need and where we need to go, and we don't, right? So we need, interoperability isn't just about connecting pipes. It's about the policy and the security pieces that allow the flexibility to do what we need to do when we need to do it. Going back to that OODA loop, right? We need to decide and act very quickly. And so I think a lot of our industry partners need to think about building in the flexibility and the security that allow us to do what we need to do with partners who we don't even know who they are yet, and the data that we need and we don't know what that is yet, right? So going back to my comment about outputs are more important than inputs, I mean, we buy a lot of data right now.
Yeah.
It's no longer about the data. It's about how we can use the data. So licensing agreements, things like that need to be changed to allow us to have the flexibility to execute when we need to execute.
No, thank you, Gary. The next question, speaking of data, buying data, it really centers around the free data. OSINT. The question is, do you think it's possible to drive the GEOINT enterprise or the intelligence enterprise and community to take full advantage of OSINT in the absence of a true IC functional lead for OSINT. And Joe, I know you've talked to this in the past, and Gary, you know a lot about functional management right now in your role at NGA.
You want to go first, Joe, or you want me to? All right, so Gary's opinion, right? Back when I was an Air Force lieutenant briefing the general, you know, if I walked in and told him what he already knew from CNN, he'd kick me out of the room, right? And we act like our decision makers and warfighters today are different than that. They're not. They have tons of information available to them. What they need from us is that 1, 2, maybe 5% that they don't know. So yeah, we should be using OSINT, and like I mentioned earlier, geospatially enabling visualization of all open source information that they already have, and then putting our information on top of that to create that distinct advantage. That way we also are saving them time, right? We're not telling them stuff they already know. Give them the picture, let them do what they need to do, and then when they need to know what we have, it's there and available for them. And on the functional management piece, you don't need a functional manager to do that. You just need to task somebody to do it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with everything Gary said. In order to inform our policymakers, our customers, whether they be warfighters or the President of the United States, they have access to all this information already. We're trying to give them that added bit of wisdom, whether that comes from an open source or whether that comes from that they may not have seen, or that comes from a clandestine source or something only achievable through technical means. We want to be able to provide that. The other part, the flip side of that, is increasingly we're going to be asked to evaluate information, to validate it. All these things, I mean, we get this now where we will get, oh, I read this in the New York Times this morning. Is it true or do you believe it? That's going to be becoming even more important because so much information is available and it is impossible for any single human being to be able to evaluate that information and find out what, I mean, I can give you data and, you know, I leave it up to you whether you think it's true or not. There's corrupted data, there's on purpose, there's corrupted data by accident, there's misinformation, there's disinformation, there's just bad information. And that's all out there and people are making decisions on it. So increasingly, as an IC, we not only have to provide information, we have to analyze it, but we also have to validate it and interpret it to a large extent.
Go ahead, Ed.
Hey, Rich, I'll talk about the other side of open source, and that is the information that we provide that is useful and helpful to our adversaries. We know, you know, I mentioned that one of my roles is about protecting Army modernization efforts. The attack vector that our strategic competitors most use is open source. We believe that the PLA has an astronomical number of people who do nothing but read what we put in the press. And I'm talking tens of thousands of open source analysts in our strategic competitors, intelligence community. And when we do that, we impose no cost or risk to them to understand what we think we're going to fight with in 2035 and 2040. So one of the things that we're trying to do is close that channel to our adversaries, or recognizing that we'll never completely close it, at least restrict it, and impose some cost to them to get that information. We talk about peer competitors, and we often think of that in terms of they'll have great capabilities in their ground forces. They'll have fifth-generation fighters. They'll have long-range precision fires and ballistic capabilities. But the other part of that is they've got world-class espionage services. And we need to be aware of that it's part of the new environment that we're in. And I think sometimes we forget that. We kind of lost the bubble on it. It's really been 30 years since we've had a strategic competitor that had an espionage service like that. And that's not even a true statement. They've always had it, but we were fighting adversaries that didn't have it. Meanwhile, let's call it what it is, the Russians and the Chinese were watching and learning from us all along, and that's the other side of open source that I just think's worth mentioning.
No, thank you very much, Ed. And I just want to open the floor up for any other comments that the panel might like to make. We've got about 60 seconds before we hit the hook. Does anybody want to contribute something before we?
I'm just going to add on that, we talked a lot about solutions and technology, and I just want to say there are a lot of good solutions and technology represented here. We can't forget our international partners who are doing great work and have different perspectives on the problems we have and different approaches that are often, many times, better than ours, and we need to find a way to be able to integrate that into our solution space as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just a quick one. Yesterday I was at the Innovation Hub down there, and one briefer mentioned about how many startups China has for developing AI systems, how many startups Russia has, how many startups US has, making a comparison. And I also heard in the plenary this morning, a briefer mentioned that normally we know we need to use the right AI system for certain specific tasks. So whether it's computer vision, or another task, I think there is a lot of investment in AI because there is a massive amount of data that can help. However, we are still not there yet, in my view. It does require an overarching artificial intelligence that is on top of the various sectors of artificial intelligence, which understands what kind of knowledge needs to be adapted to that specific task. So we are, in my view, we are still far from a proper vetted artificial intelligence. Thank you.
And I know I'm standing between you and free alcohol, so I'll be quick. We talk, as Americans, we're always going to the technical solution first. And that's not to say there's not going to be a technical solution to some of our problems, but we have to make sure with the hardware and the software that the wetware comes along with it. It doesn't matter if we invent the greatest black box on the face of the earth that can give us all the data and validate it and solve all our problems. If we don't have the authorities, the systems, the processes that are able to take advantage of that. And the system is already breaking down in terms of how we take in data and how we're able to process it and analyze it, just because the norms haven't kept pace.
So one last thought that might be a good way to end. For those of us who are charged with forecasting the future, so decision makers and commanders can make the decisions that they need to, General Murray, my boss, when he charged us to write the future operational environment, said two things. One was hit the target, not the bullseye. And he reminded me that Secretary and DCI Gates has a rather well-known saying about those who try to predict or forecast the next time, or where we're going to fight next, what the world's going to be like. He reminded us that we've tried this many times in the past, and we've got a perfect record. We've never gotten it right a single time.
All right, on that happy note from General Murray and all of you to this panel that closed up a really fulsome learning afternoon, thank you so much. Thank you for dedicating your time not only to our national security interests, but also to this panel and our learning. Could we give them a round of applause, and a round of applause for you as well?